Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm very fortunate to invite back Mr. Matthew Ehret. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
It's always a pleasure when you come on. It's a little intimidating with your massive Library of Alexandria behind you.
It's a green screen. Don't worry.
Yeah. Mine's actually it's a virtual background. I have a library behind me. I just chose this tropical oasis.
Do you really?
No.
Okay.
It's not even my house. I got a whole bunch of books, but I'm the kind of guy that puts them in Tupperware containers or on the floor.
No, they're pretty handy. A lot of these books, I don't know if I told you, but a lot of them I got when I was working at a university, and they were purging the library because somebody came in with this reforming notion that they wanted to make more space to do like yoga. So students could, instead of like having books in the library, have a space to do yoga and meditation. And then all of the books that they threw out, I was just walking off my shift going to the bus, and I passed by the library, and there were all these books just with a sign saying, "Will be shredded, take now." And I spoke to the person in charge, and they were like, "Yeah, everything's online anyway. You don't have to have physical books anymore. People could just go online." And it was like a bittersweet moment, because I'm like, okay, I spent the next 3 days carrying like 500 pounds of books home, but it's sad because, like how many libraries and universities all over North America and Europe are doing the same thing, purging real physical books, like the original writings of Ben Franklin and the original writings of Lincoln that are up there, with this assumption that somehow the internet is a forever thing that can't be ever just shut off or erased at a given moment, right? Like it's a real, nerve-wracking thing.
You should have taken all the books and then given them a copy of Fahrenheit 451.
They're ironically shredding that one too.
That's probably the first one they got to get rid
of.
Yeah. Matthew, I asked you to come, and you sent me your upcoming video, and I wanted to bring you back on to ask you a couple of questions in furtherance of that video.
Sure.
But I want you to tell me about that video, but let's start with maybe a trailer that you got.
Yeah, it's a pseudo trailer. So I made like 4 excerpts from the film. This is one of them. It's like maybe 2.5 minutes long that just gives people a flavor of one of the elements. And it's called the dystopic, or Mark Carney's Dystopic Pedigree is the name of this 34-minute film that was just released a few days ago. This is just one excerpt from about the 20-minute mark, dealing with one aspect of what Carney represents. So yeah, we can totally run that and then talk about the film in general.
Sounds good. So I'm just going to bring this up. Let's put us down here.
At the highest echelons of the Bilderberg Group, which orchestrated the Western systemic collapse, that citizens would likely rise up in opposition to the abuses of the Wall Street and London banking cartels. A distraction was needed. Thus, we shouldn't be surprised to discover that major controllers of the loudest anti-establishment movements today are directly affiliated with the same imperial controlling hands that carefully manufactured this world crisis to begin with. Take the case of the UK-based Extinction Rebellion, which has attempted to call for not only the total abolishment of major banks, but of industrial civilization itself. Leaders of the Extinction Rebellion have called for the total decarbonization of life on Earth, extreme forms of Green New Deals, and ironically, depopulation. All outcomes conveniently desired by Mark Carney and his associated technocrats in London. Just in case you thought Extinction Rebellion was somehow untouched by the hand of social engineers, Alex Evans, a leading figure behind the movement, was a former consultant on Prince Charles's International Sustainability Unit and co-author of the U.S. National Intelligence Council Global Trends 2025, A Transformed World, which became an environmental foreign policy blueprint for the Obama administration in 2008. Currently, Evans also runs the Collective Psychology Project, where psychology meets politics. Other leading British intelligence figures managing the Extinction Rebellion movement included Farhan Yaman and Sam Gale of Chatham House, the controlling institution behind the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations. Chatham House is overseen by its president, Mark Carney. How much of a rebellion can it really be if the rebellion is set up by the establishment? The oligarchs running the grand green design since the Club of Rome's Sir Alexander King began the Limits to Growth study in 1970 knew that green, low-energy flux density sources of energy would inevitably constrict global population. And that is exactly what they wanted. Sir Alexander King said as much in 1991 when he wrote in the preface of The First Global Revolution,
"In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself."
I guess I'm reading that book right now.
Yeah? Oh, sweet.
I'm about 25 pages in. Where did it stop?
Hold on.
I got
I'm trying to stop it. It was hard. Okay, here we go. We could remove it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm at the who's that total knob job psychopath, Secretary of State for the U.S.
Kissinger? Yeah.
I'm at the Kissinger chapter.
Yeah, that's a wild chapter. That's good. That's cool, man. No, it's the Sir Henry Kissinger midwife to New Babylon chapter, right? Yeah.
I'm reading it, and like I know you, and we're kind of in the same circles. I'm like, if you use this language on a normie, they would probably think you're crazy.
Yeah, I mean that book series requires like a little bit of a foundation for the reader. I presumed a priori that most normies are not gonna be my target audience. You have to have made a few discoveries for that book to have any meaning.
Yeah, it'd be funny if you're trying to describe it to some girl at the bar. You're like, oh, tell me what your book is about. You just lose her right away.
Yeah, definitely not the most sexy thing in the world. Unless, I mean, yeah, no, it's definitely not the most sexy. I was trying to think of a way to spin that in a way that it could possibly help one pick up, and no, I don't think it can.
Well, maybe if you get like 1 million sales and say you're rich.
Oh yeah, you drive to the bar in a Ferrari, and yeah, sure, why not? Then anything you say is going to be interesting, I suppose.
Yeah. Matt, like I said, I got some questions, but before we get to that, could you tell, like, what's the purpose of the video? What are you trying to get across, and what did you find in your research?
Well, the purpose of the video, and originally, honestly, I wasn't going to do it. I'd written a lot about Carney since 2012 when I set up the Canadian Patriot Review, and he was still the governor of the Bank of Canada at the time, and I'd started doing some deep dives into his background at Goldman Sachs, and what he had been doing at the time when I was originally doing my first stage research on him, and he became the topic of issue number 6 of the Canadian Patriot Review. We did a special against the bail-in regime. And so I was looking at the origins of the bail-ins, which were clearly being set up to be installed in the Canadian Bank Acts, which finally did happen in 2016. I was with an activist organization at the time trying to lobby in Parliament to bring awareness to stop this from happening. And so Carney's role in going back to 2010 as an architect of the bail-in regime as his sort of weird solution morally to not have to bail out systemically important too big to fail banks if it should happen again, based on the idea that now with this bail-in, the banks could simply confiscate people's savings that are in the bank and turn it into bank stock in order to keep the bank solvent if in the context of a systemic future crisis. So that was clearly an exacerbator, a trigger of blowing out the time bomb that has become our financial system, which Carney himself, as a Goldman Sachs investment banker throughout the 90s and early 2000s, was a direct player in helping to grow that bubble economy based on fictitious capital, unpayable debts. And so he created the time bomb. He or at least he participated in helping to grow the time bomb, and also then create the trigger, the bail-ins. And then also he's devoted his life as an eco-warrior of central banks or central bankers to create the solution, which is the foundation of a new green anti-carbon world economic order, which he's also been a big player in for his entire like adult career. So to have an insider on that level, being installed as the official Prime Minister of Canada, which I've been warning about since 2021, I was making the point that look, they're going to install Carney. He's fit the profile. He's been vetted. They're Justin Trudeau is a cartoonish placeholder. It's something that has concerned me for a long time, and I think what he represents is far too misunderstood, even by those who don't like Carney, even by conservatives who despise what he represents. They don't understand what he's a part of and what his role is within a bigger picture. And so within that documentary, I wanted to try to clarify some of those historic and global considerations to properly give some context of like what is the pedigree of what Carney is, so that people don't fall into a trap, which I see as a danger right now on a few levels of people falling into, who even despise, like I said, Carney and want to stop his Green New Deal.
So what exactly is the danger, and why are you saying he's installed? Don't we live in a democracy where he's elected?
Oh, rhetorical questions. Those are fun.
I forgot to bring my spoon visually.
Ow! Yeah. That's the softest ball I've caught in a while. It's all fuzzy.
Yeah, there's no hardball questions here.
Yeah, so towards the end of the documentary, I just sort of I feature the video clip with Carney and Trump when Carney it says famously on camera that I've spoken to the owners of Canada and they're not interested in selling Canada to the United States. And I asked the rhetorical question: who are those owners of Canada? Are they the people, or is it something else? And then the next clip over has Carney's oath of office as he became Prime Minister, and as he was inducted into the Privy Council office, where he delivers his oath to keep secret all things which will be told in secret in Privy Council, to be devoted as a good servant ought to be to King Charles III and his heirs into perpetuity. And it's just as a reminder, within the context of everything that I'd gone through in that video, of like what exactly is the global invisible empire and its structures of power projection that have always been there, that are tied to what Cecil Rhodes was rallying around when he was creating over a century ago his foundation for a new mercenary order of technocrats through the Rhodes Scholarship Program, through the Roundtable network of think tanks, of which Carney is president of or was until he became Prime Minister. He was president of Chatham House, the British controlling hand of the Council on Foreign Relations. And so there's an invisible empire which has been present and dominant in all of Canada's history, which is very difficult for many Canadians to think about. I've spoken to political science professors over the years who don't understand what this is. They don't understand the powers of the Privy Council, of the lieutenant governors, of the Privy Council office, of the deputy ministers that are unelected bureaucrats assigned to manage various members of the government who are elected but don't have a lot of freedom, though citizens on the lower level are induced to believe we are a democracy. And what Cecil Rhodes called for in his manifestos, as far as the rebranding and reemergence of a global British Empire and the reacquisition of the lost colonies of the Americas as an integral part of that empire in this new age, which was always sort of the foundational intention driving the growth of the deep state, both in Canada and in the United States and in Europe, over the next century, has been extremely, again, just undervalued, underappreciated. And so Carney's role as somebody who's been vetted high up, I mean, governor of the Bank of England for 7-8 years. He was in charge of the Financial Stability Board of the Bank of International Settlements, one of the most powerful positions you could imagine, because it's the regulator of all global derivatives, which are the financial instruments that have been used to create a speculative time bomb that is set to detonate to, in a controlled demolition, take down the world economy and then create a crisis that would usher in an excuse to bring in a new economic system. So Carney was in charge of that. The guy's been there for a long time. He's his wife also is a player who's high up in the Canada 2020 think tank that I talk about in this documentary, which installed Justin Trudeau. It was set up by a bunch of privy councillors in 2003. And it's been a much more powerful think tank than people realize. Even two of its founding members were founding architects of the North American Union, which I believe didn't disappear, though they said it disappeared in 2007 as an idea. That is to create a sort of European Union model imposed onto North America with an Amaro is what they were calling for back in 2007, sort of a euro for North America. People didn't want it. They didn't like it. It got shelved, but I think it's never been taken off the table. And if anything, I think that there's maneuvers right now to bring it back in a new form, a new iteration. Also, that Carney, I think, desires. And I think that there's patriots in America who don't understand that they're doing certain things right now that is accelerating something which many patriots who like Trump and perhaps Trump himself believes is going to they believe it's going to be something that liberates America from systems of empire and restores the legacy of a moral republic. But I fear that the maneuvers and the game plan that is being adopted is actually inducing America to fall into a trap to essentially collapse into the British Empire, a new British Empire in the context of an economic crisis. So that's something that I'm trying to, again, sound the alarm bells on, because I don't think most people, including probably Trump, is aware fully that that's what's been gamed out.
Wow, now I got the impossible task of following up with the question.
Oh, shit, man. I'm sorry. I'll try to keep them shorter. Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. Do you get this feeling that ever since like the mid-90s, England is trying to get back in the scene? Is this a baton pass where U.S. is kind of like, we're done with this empire?
It's I don't think Britain or England ever got out of the empire game. I mean, I know the big story, the big narrative is projected that England ceased to be an empire in 1945 or 46, gave liberty to all of its colonies, and then it became a commonwealth. And now the baton was passed to America to take on the white man's burden of keeping the darker skinned, inferior peoples of the world subdued under the system of power, for a variety of reasons. And in a certain degree, there's a mechanistic truth to that. But the reality is that those who oversaw the murder of America's presidents, who brought in that anti-American policy, because America was founded as an anti-imperial society, but those who were enforcing that imperial embrace of an Anglo-American special relationship after World War II, who created the Five Eyes, the age of NATO, the forever wars in Vietnam, and then later on against Islamic terrorism, which again was bankrolled and made possible by the CIA under the days of Zbigniew Brzezinski in the 70s and the 80s, that was funding all of these radicalizing madrasas to create a new enemy that then became useful in the age of, Clinton, but then really with Bush and Cheney. That's a real problem. But those who brought that policy about, as I've gone through in many of my books, were themselves Rhodes Scholars, were themselves overseen by the Rhodes-Milner apparatus, the Council on Foreign Relations. People like Kissinger were devoted to that thing. And people like Bill Clinton, who took NATO after the Soviet Union collapsed and for the first time carried out an illegal war to destroy Bosnia and Herzegovina. Well, not Bosnia, the entire, the whole entire bombing campaign on Serbia was overseen by Bill Clinton, who was a Rhodes Scholar and brought in a massive influx of Rhodes Scholars into the executive office of the presidency in a very serious way and set the stage for then what would become the forever wars after 9/11. So, you know, you've got this real problem by something that people think of as America, but it's not really American. Most American citizens didn't want this. They weren't asked. They didn't vote. Their lives have been systematically destroyed over the past 40 years of globalization, or 50 years of globalization and mergers and acquisitions and these things. And America is much more precarious. It's not more secure after having overthrown something like 200 governments and carried out so many acts of regime change since the Cold War began. There's more hostility, more anti-American sentiment in the world at large than there was before this began, this shit show. But it's not American. I mean, JFK was trying to stop it. Bobby Kennedy was trying to stop it. Franklin Roosevelt was trying to stop it. Earlier on, Warren Harding was trying to stop it. Martin Luther King later on was trying to stop it. Lincoln, McKinley, Garfield, all of these assassinated American leaders were all trying to reverse this to restore this constitutional identity. So, now we're at a point where there's an opportunity, because people are now finally, I think, more hungry and receptive to what is the true story of the better America that's been forgotten, that was anti-imperial. And they want to believe that that's what's fully coming online right now, except that I don't fully, I see that there's a trace element of that, of under Donald Trump and MAGA, is a desire to get rid of colonial ambitions and just restore an America first concern to rebuild industry and these good things that should be, not get sucked into forever wars, not try to destroy other nations that we think of as our rivals. That shouldn't be what a true nation does. Except there are traps that I think have been laid within the MAGA movement and around the deals that Trump has had to make with certain Silicon Valley transhumanists who have I think a different set of loyalties and a different set of ideas about what America should become, that is not based upon the restoration of the true America, but rather upon things like we're seeing with the Golden Dome idea, or which is basically this idea of weaponizing space, creating both a security complex and a weapons array, both as far as the entirety of the North American continent, involving also Greenland, acquiring territories down beyond Panama, and then installing both a very, very powerful weapons array with laser, long-range missiles, other things for surveillance, a lot of it utilizing pseudo-civilian front groups like SpaceX or Starlink or Palantir as sort of, again, semi-non-governmental agencies that would appear to be doing it for the purpose of free enterprise and just making money. But in reality, these are cutouts. They're very much tied to the very same deep state that did 9/11, that did the forever wars in the Middle East. They're not different qualitatively. And I think that it looks too much like what I've seen put forth by, and I go through this in the video, Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, and his program back in the 30s for a Technocracy Incorporated, a North American technate to massively surveil those living in North America while projecting power outside of the North American Union sort of jurisdiction onto other powers that we might have to go to war with. Asia, Russia, China are just two of those. So these are all things that I think about. And also just the fact that a lot of the economic policies being wielded right now, although I like protectionism and I like restoring America's manufacturing, and I think Canada should do the same thing too if we really care about ourselves, which is what Trump is doing. He's wielding protectionism, and that's good. And he's speaking to a deep demand that the Americans desire to have their manufacturing built back in America again. That's good. But the way it's being done is not the way that it has. This isn't the real American system, because the real American system use of protectionism under McKinley, JFK, FDR, Lincoln, it was never based upon the idea of hurting other nations' abilities to be sovereign in order to satisfy your economic growth. It was always based on a reciprocity of benefit to all. And the danger now is I'm seeing that people are losing touch with that, and they're cheering on in a celebratory way things that are hurting the Japanese people, the South Korean people, the Thai people, by virtue of a weaponization of tariffs that are forcing these countries to basically give in hundreds of billions of dollars to funds that will be controlled by U.S. billionaires tied to transhumanists that will then allocate those funds towards, facilitating maybe investments into America, while at the same time accepting American goods with no tariffs that are going to go into these countries, undercutting their local aspirations to have manufacturing and other things, but they still suffer tariffs that will, be paid on goods coming in from Japan and other things in South Korea into America. So it's not really, it's the type of tariff policy that's a bit abusive. And it's the sort that I saw from the British Empire, because the British Empire, this is the irony. In the 18th century and 19th century, the way the British Empire was able to have a command of manufacturing over the nations of the world was that they enforced free trade to other countries, including the American colonies, including Canada. We had to accept British free trade to keep our markets open for the flooding in of cheap goods coming in from Britain, British manufacturers and British controlled goods that would prevent us from growing local manufacturing. That's what kept the colonies at bay for over a century. That's what was the fight throughout the 19th century. But Britain always used protectionism for themselves. So it was, good for thee, but not for me. So they would always use British protectionism to protect British industries, and they would always have a command and control over the British economy, but they always enforced free trade for their victims in India and Ireland, who would then be slaughtered as the British East India Company was granted more powers to control the economies of India, of Africa, of other countries that would subvert their ability to stand on their own 2 feet. And I fear that, or not I fear, I see that that's exactly the model being adopted by this perverse version of free trade today, which is crippling. It's expanding the power of Google, of Amazon, to have control. Monsanto, Cargill are having control over the Japanese economy by having Japan get rid of their regulation on food, because Japan, for example, they have one of the best regulatory regimes on quality of food to prevent because rice is sacred in Japan. So the quality of Japanese rice is amongst the best in the world. But now, under the New Deal, they've been forced to remove all of the oversight and open up the door to a massive infusion of U.S. rice that's going to destroy, which is also Monsanto rice. It's GMO, heavily dangerous agricultural produce, which is going to wipe out both the health but also the economic sovereignty of many farmers in Japan. Similar things for South Korea have happened. So it's not healthy the way I'm seeing this right now. And they're already subjected to, they've already been hosting U.S. military bases. Japan has 58,000 U.S. troops that have been there since we bombed them to smithereens in World War II. We never left. We've been using them as a colony for the past 80 years. Same thing for South Korea. They're hosting U.S.-run THAAD missile systems, and they have 28,000 U.S. troops. And biolabs, secretive biolabs that have no oversight, run by the U.S. Pentagon, that have been there since the Cold War. And so we've been using these places like colonies. And then in Trump's discourse, I'm very disappointed that he uses this victim language to make Americans believe that Japan's been abusing Americans. South Korea's been abusing Americans. Now we have to get revenge. China's been abusing Americans. We got to get revenge. And that type of sentiment is not conducive for a free society that's going to be capable of actually doing battle against the nature of the oligarchy that's been trying to kill both Japanese and Chinese and South Korean and American citizens alike, equally. So, yeah.
So before proceeding to the audience, if you have any questions, I'm going to review them at the end. Saturday morning, I can't multitask right now. Let's go back to what you said about, you mentioned a couple of presidents way back at the beginning, Lincoln, Jackson, JFK, FDR. Can you give some examples of like something that they've done that you say that they're trying to reinforce the constitutional identity? I mean, with JFK, I think he was trying to go back to the physical currency, physical money.
Yeah. Well, JFK had a very full spectrum program. If you want to start with him, that's a good idea. He had a program I mean, there's so many aspects to it. I think the first part of his paradigm that he was bringing back to life was, first of all, a paradigm that saw America's interests in the well-being of their neighbors. So he immediately, his first foreign state, or the first foreign leader that he brought into the White House in a red carpet gala state visit, the first one was not England, it was not a European, it wasn't a Canadian, it was Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of the Pan-African movement of Ghana. And so that was the first ally that JFK brought in, and he signed a bunch of deals to help Ghana break free of what was then becoming a neo-colonial policy under the IMF and the World Bank of debt slavery, conditionality-laced predatory loans that would keep these former British colonies under the control of a new type of empire, managed by the City of London and of Wall Street. And so JFK was desperate and had a visionary program to help the Pan-African movement that wanted true full spectrum economies, industrialization, to proceed for the first time in a serious way, unsabotaged. And he signed a deal to build, and it was built, the Volta River Dam, the biggest hydroelectric dam in all of Africa, that was supposed to be, and it provided something like 6 gigawatts of electricity desperately needed. That was going to be the foundation of the first phase of an industrial renaissance of Africa. And it would have succeeded more than it did if it were not for the CIA and some British intelligence agencies that oversaw a coup d'etat to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah after those same agencies had murdered JFK. And that happened in 1966. And even today, there's a plaque in honor of John F. Kennedy at the Volta River Dam that's still there. But more than that, I think that JFK had a program to also end the entire Manichaean formula of mutually assured destruction that was sort of the fabric underpinning the Cold War, of the free capitalist nations that would be at a forever war against the authoritarian communist nations. And that sort of Iron Curtain idea of having everybody with a knife to each other's throats, except with nuclear weapons, was a balance of terror, and it created a tension in which the deep state complex could grow in a very, very big way. So he had a program that he offered at the United Nations, and there's a video of this speech still online 3 weeks before he was murdered, to have a U.S.-Russia joint space program to jointly put a man and an American and a Russian on the moon by the end of the decade was the idea. But then to more broadly jointly have a cooperative policy and paradigm around making new discoveries, sharing them in the fruits of new technologies together to break out of this zero-sum thinking and introduce some higher function of natural law into the mix, which is what the American Constitution has always been about, is natural law. The third thing, as you pointed out, he did have a fight to bring in a reform on treasury-backed notes that would create something alternative to the Federal Reserve control of credit and the credit supply, with a silver-backed form of currency that he was looking at transitioning into. I don't think it didn't mature very far, but it was a serious idea that was being put into motion that I think was scaring certain agencies that had taken control of America financially from 1913 onward. And he had a plan to also take down the CIA. And he did make moves by firing Allen Dulles, Charles Cabell, Richard Bissell, the head of the vice, that Charles Cabell was the vice director of the CIA after Allen Dulles, who both got fired. Richard Bissell was the head of special operations and psychological warfare that was also overseeing both Area 51. That was his other assignment as founder and director of Area 51, where they were carrying out tests of newly acquired aerospace technology from the Germans that were carrying out a secretive program on alternative forms of aerial technologies, drones, other things like that, which they found then useful as a side note, right? Because I'm doing a documentary series on the hidden hand behind UFOs, to create a myth that would help to explain to people watching at UFOs flying in and around U.S. military bases that they were actually looking at some alien foreign species from another galaxy or dimension, which was useful for the this secret government apparatus to give people a false sense of what they were looking at, and not seeing that there was this very intelligible man-made weaponry that was being developed. Anyway, JFK was looking at taking, as he said, breaking apart the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scattering it into the winds. He did see it properly as a nefarious organization. And protective tariffs. So he had a national a national protective tariff policy that was based upon an industrial program with a vision for continental water development, hydroelectric dams, nuclear power development, which he had a continental view of, which was healthy. It was based on cooperation with other powers, looking towards taking down the Wall Street and intelligence agency controls over America, and for improving the quality of life and getting American citizens to become more, morally, physically capable of participating in their own society, which was hugely beneficial to Canada too. Except that we had a doofus, well-meaning doofus Prime Minister Diefenbaker at the time, who didn't understand that at all, and got his own ass kicked at a certain moment in 1963, and had no idea what the fuck happened to him. So that's a side story.
Okay. 2 follow-up questions. The first one, why do you not include Eisenhower into that? Because he did have that pretty famous farewell speech warning about the military and the intelligence agencies.
Oh, because I thought we were only talking about JFK. Eisenhower was I'm very sympathetic, and I think that he wisened up. He wisened up to his. I think he had a patriotic heart, but also a weak heart, and he really wanted to be part, from what I gather, of the cool kids. He wanted to be invited into the cool clubs, and really got excited when he would get invited by John Foster Dulles or the Rockefellers to come to an elite golf course or whatever. And so he allowed himself to be kind of swayed by a desire to be popular, even though he did some very good things in World War II. And I think at a certain point he realized that he had allowed a beast to grow that was far too dangerous than even he had realized. And a big wake-up call was, I think, when he allowed for or acquiesced to the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, the leader who had been very popular leader who had just recently nationalized Anglo petroleum oil, and he signed off on that. Although honestly, in his defense, that was Truman. Truman put the ball into motion, and then like 2 weeks after Truman was out, Truman basically signed off on getting the U.S. to back the British and overthrowing Mossadegh. And then Eisenhower could have stopped it, but in the first days of his presidency, he was a bit weak, which is why things like the Bay of Pigs usually happen, like at the very beginning of a new president's administration, when they have the least control over, the deep state complex that they're inheriting. So, but then Eisenhower, he did make some good maneuvers. I think he tried to make amends for that by creating the Atoms for Peace to assist Iran in having a national controlled nuclear program with a new engineering class that would be trained in the best of science and then sent back to Tehran and Iran more generally to help build an industrial nuclear powered society. And so, I think that was his way of saying, I'm sorry. He definitely, he played a big role in stopping the Suez crisis, which could have been an Israeli, US, British attack on Nasser when Nasser nationalized the Suez. And he said no. And the fact that he put his foot down and said no gave Nasser the space he needed, because Britain and Israel didn't have the power to go and declare war on Egypt by themselves. So that really, really won many years for Egypt to carry out its fight for a pan-Arab strategy, very, very in synergy with what Kwame Nkrumah had been fighting for with the Pan-African strategy. So, Eisenhower did a lot, but he did allow for the growth of this military industrial complex. And it's good that he gave his last outgoing, sermon to the people, warning that, oh yeah, by the way, I let this thing get out of hand. Sorry, JFK. I hope you can do something about this. Bye. It's been a little too late.
Just pulled a hand grenade and tossed it to the next guy.
Yeah. Hot potato. Yeah.
What? things have changed, though. I mean, whereas under Eisenhower, he confronted England and France. It seems like Trump can't really do that right now. Look at Ukraine. He's basically like, all right, fine, as long as you buy my weapons, you guys can blast Ukraine out to smithereens.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I have a lot of, I know that I have friends, and some of them are very smart analysts who have a very white-pilled way of analyzing things, and they're of the view that, you know, Trump's got a brilliant strategy to bankrupt the European Union, to, you know, to accelerate their collapse in order to bring about a new peace movement of Europe, and maybe the restoration of nationalist leaders of Europe that are going to replace the current batch of warmongering technocrats. Same thing for the UK. And that, you know, he's got secret deals with Putin and with Xi Jinping behind the scenes, so that even though he's expanding U.S. military, aggressive plans around China's perimeter, around Russia's perimeter, especially using Ukraine and Taiwan and Japan and Philippines as military. So even though that's all happening, there's secret positive deals to create a U.S.-Russia-China friendship to break the power of the evil central bankers. You know, I want to believe that that's true, but to be honest with myself, is I have not been at all persuaded of that, and instead I'm very concerned that this is what it seems to be, as you pointed out, a policy of a continuation of policy on these fronts. Though there are changes on other fronts, but on this particular war front, to try to diminish and undermine and waste away Russia's capabilities to both maintain itself through the wasting war of their Ukraine-Vietnam war that we've been facilitating for a number of years, as well as undermine its connections through, you know, its relationship to Iran, its relationship to North Korea, to China, to its other allies amongst the Eurasian Economic Union, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. There's a bunch of stands on the east side of the Caspian. There's a lot of effort, it seems, to undermine, to weaken all of the connective tissue, economic connective tissue between these nations, to break them up in a variety of things that are happening at the same time, both in the Middle East, but also in the weakening of Iran, who's had its much of its qualified leadership decapitated since the murder of Raisi and the defense minister last year. And now, like 30 leading members of the Revolutionary Guard have been killed in the 12-day war. Azerbaijan, which plays a key role, it's the stability of Azerbaijan as a connecting node between Russia and Iran and broader India below is vital. And now we're seeing that there's this weird Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkey alliance overseen by U.S. military agencies, which are taking greater controls of this area of the Eurasian heartland, and are controlling things like this specific corridor connecting rail and oil pipelines between the Caspian, the Baku, and Europe. That's really threatening the international north-south transportation corridor, as well as the east-west new Silk Road. So all of these things are still happening. The National Endowment for Democracy, people are happy that the U.S. aid has been cut significantly, and I'm happy about that too. The U.S. aid has been used. It was created by JFK to provide aid for nations who needed it. Good idea. But after JFK was killed, just like so many things, it became infiltrated by ideologues who wanted to simply use it as a cover for cultural and other power projection of America. And so it did a lot of damage. And so it's good that Trump is reining that thing in and slashing the budget at U.S. aid. But at the same time, the heavy lifting of regime change operations was not U.S. aid. It was the National Endowment for Democracy. And that hasn't really been cut. It was frozen for a couple of weeks. And then a new policy was introduced, which Brian Berletic revealed to me, revealed it in one of his broadcasts and a Telegram group. Was actually a new policy was passed that allows for the National Endowment for Democracy to not reveal where its funding goes. So not only was the funding not cut, but a policy was passed for the first time that allows it to not say where it spends its money. So when you go to the NED website today, everything is opaque. You don't see anything anymore. So it's all now much more underground. And it seems like when I look at the effects of what's going on behind the scenes with Cambodia, that has a special deal on military cooperation with the United States, with Thailand, which has all sorts of U.S. military and other NED operations infused in thousands of organizations throughout Thailand, including a U.S. puppet regime in the form of the Prime Minister of Thailand, a billionaire. Philippines, same deal. Taiwan also has a huge amount of recipient funding from the NED and is overseen by a bunch of Green Berets who are stationed in Taiwan as a beachhead for an oncoming war. Japan has similarly massive NED funding. None of this has gone away. So when I see things like that, or again, the activities in Azerbaijan or Armenia, or the normalization of Al Qaeda in Syria, Al Julani, who's now all of a sudden been normalized as this legit leader of New Syria. This guy's a head chopper terrorist who's now receiving a lot of support from the U.S. and Israel. So none of these things give me confidence that the Patriots are in a good place right now in the United States. It makes me nervous.
So I guess we should start wrapping it up because we have to get to the questions as well, assuming there are any. What exactly is going on? Like, if we were going to explain this to a child, I would say like the powers that be, I don't know if you want to call it Davos, City of London, whatever, they've hijacked America and they're using its global reserve status to print money to then bribe other countries. Is that what's going on with this empire?
The voice cut out for a second. Can you just repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Is this like a fraud sort of empire where you have the global reserve currency, you're printing money and bribing other countries? It just seems like it's not necessarily the U.S. taxpayers that are financing all of this. It's inflation.
Yeah, I mean it's that's on a mechanistic level, like a machine, right? There's many cogs in a machine, many parts that make the machine do a thing. And that's one of the parts, one of the aspects of the thing. But I wouldn't say that that's the causal. It's not causal in any way. That's just like one of many things that make the empire do what it does. So it's a debt-based system of, especially since the Bretton Woods system was set up in 1944 in New Hampshire at the end of World War II. The idea was, okay, America is the only like non-slaughtered economy after World War II that came out very powerful, as a productive power. And so it was known back then that the US dollar was better than gold. And it was, because it was the dollars of the US were a reflection of a real power of producing real value that sustained human life. That's just a fact. So to the degree that you had more dollars in circulation, but you had also an accompanying increase of those productive powers of labor, then it was a legitimate anti-inflationary quality of money circulation and money growth as far as the quantity of money in circulation, because the buying power of the dollar was increasing at a faster rate than the circulation of the money supply was growing. And that's fine. That's a good thing. You want to have that. But that means you always have to have a commitment to forever increasing new discoveries, new inventions, overcoming the limits to growth as just your Tao, right? As just your way of being always. Philosophically, that's very intimidating for people who are not creative. So people who are power hungry control freaks who don't like doing real world work and using their real mind for anything other than trying to control the world for the sake of their egos, they get very threatened by that type of spirit because they don't have it and they want to project their own lack of creativity onto the system that they wish to control. And so they're of the view that, well, there has to be an end to growth somewhere, right? We have to end the growth. And so they impose the limits. Like, okay, but what are the limits, right? Who's going to decide mathematically what is the ideal carrying capacity of the earth? Is it 9 billion people? Is it 12 billion? Is it 2 billion? Is it 500 million? Who's going to make that decision? And, you're getting into very slippery territory at that point. Morally speaking, because then as we see with like Bill Gates or Dennis Meadows or the Club of Rome crowd, it's like, well, what type of solutions do you have then to bring about your idea of natural law, the natural equilibrium? So and then everything goes, right? Everything, if 500 million or 1 billion is what is natural because your computers say so, then that's what's good. And thus everything evil could be justified as being a necessary evil for the ultimate greater good, whether it's shit in the drinking water, jabs into our whatever, destroying the food supply, whatever. Everything becomes justified for the greater good, but it's not really good. It's evil. So why am I saying that? I'm just saying that because the Bretton Woods system was created in 1944. So I'm going to loop it back. I didn't forget. And everybody had to basically carry out international trade and transactions and settle their balance of payments based on the payment of US dollars that they all had to have reserves of. And if the US is not acting like a basket case, that's fine. The problem was the US was taken over, as we know, and it started acting like a basket case, throwing its and weaponizing that power, because with power comes a moral responsibility that it abrogated. And then it started utilizing everyone's dependency upon the US dollar to start bossing nations around and telling them what they were not allowed to do or develop into, which we saw really peak by the 1970s when, the petrodollar was created by Henry Kissinger and the trilaterals of David Rockefeller. And all of a sudden you had an incentive that was maintained to both not only keep the dollar alive. So everybody was then being brutalized into buying, like foreign nations, into buying US treasuries at greater rates to keep the treasury apparently alive. But then because it's now tied to petrodollars, that the sale of international oil now is specifically only going to be carried out in US dollars by the OPEC nations, that now there's an incentive to carry out oil wars. You could make more money by not investing in nuclear power, which was the orientation of most of the Canadian energy engineering complex of the 60s and the early 70s, was to phase out of hydro, phase out of petroleum, natural gas things, and oil. Same thing for the US and Europe. And then to move to the new phase of human energy, which was nuclear, pebble bed reactors, thorium, molten salts. Fusion was being discussed and being invested in. Space exploration was also being invested in massively, which is what JFK was also inspiring people to think about our economy as being an open system reflection of the universe, which has no apparent absolute limits to where is the universe's limits. There doesn't seem to be any that we've ever proven to exist. There are mathematical models that we've seen experts assert exist, with no actual evidence that that's true, but in time and space. But, when you actually look at the evidence of galaxies, the golden section formation within star systems, within galaxies, that reflects also activity within the atomic level, the only evidence we see is that there's creative growth at all levels of existence that we can understand. And then when we understand and act according to, we all of a sudden find ourselves in a position that no other animal finds itself in, which is that we can have more of our people living at a higher quality of life with a greater power of creative expression, if we don't tolerate empires and the normalization of corruption and stupidity. So now we're in a position where, the US dollar, which was once an industrial economy, is now a time bomb sitting on speculative debts that'll never be paid, that are designed not to be payable, with derivatives bubbles that are like now something like 20 or 30 times the world GDP, that grew up out of literally nothing over the last 35 years. That's the time bomb that Carney oversaw the growth of, that is designed to blow, and it will blow, and we are going to get a new system. And the question has always been, is that new system going to serve sovereign nation states and citizens working together for the benefit of the species, or is it going to benefit a slave master genocidal oligarchy in creating a new techno-feudalism? That's the question, right? So yeah,
I'm assuming it's the latter.
That's the orientation in some parts. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go over to the questions. I bookmarked a couple of these. So Uncle Ray, how much influence do you think Carney has in China, on China?
Not too much. I mean, people make a big deal about his role in I'm forgetting all of a sudden what's the asset management company that he was not BlackRock or Blackstone. It's somebody in the chats, please refresh my memory here. Brookfield. That's it. So he was in charge of Brookfield until he became prime minister. Then he got rid of that position. But Brookfield is a massively globally influential asset management company, which was set up as a merger between two Bronfman-run agencies, Brascan and Peter Bronfman's other asset management company in 1998. So these two, again, they were both Bronfman managed, and they merged together. Then they became Brookfield. Now, Brookfield has a lot of possessions that it owns, especially in the energy sector. Green energy is its focus. Apartment buildings, office buildings, has a lot of those in various nations of the world. It has a lot in Brazil because of Brascan, the Brazilian Light and Traction. That was the former Canadian-run company that owned most of Brazil's infrastructure, and oversaw regime change coups whenever you would have a nationalist leader emerge in Brazil, like Goulart was then overthrown by Brascan assets in the 60s, and in his stead was installed a pro-free market military junta, similar to what they did in Chile. So they do have assets in China. I went onto their website to see how many assets, and they have.
Let me just clarify. He's got a follow-up point. Since Carney represents the same network as Maurice Strong, is it not dangerous that he would have a direct influence on China?
Yeah, but he doesn't have that much influence. So yeah, I see what you're saying. So he, they have two solar power parks in China, about 12 office buildings that they own in China, mostly in Shanghai, and I think a windmill farm. So it's not very much as far as, and I think they got like a loan for $250 million from the Chinese state bank, or one of the state banks, back in 2022. Now, on the one hand, conservatives are being fed propaganda that has convinced them that Carney is a Chinese asset because he met with the head of the Chinese state bank and got that loan for Brookfield to buy up some apartment buildings or office buildings in China. But honestly, these are minuscule numbers, and their actual like strategic controls over Chinese assets are pretty small. However, it doesn't mean that I'm not concerned about Malthusian Anglo-Canadian influence in infiltrating the Chinese government, or at least not even government, but more the institutions that shape things like the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, China's green energy policy-making circles. Those concern me, but I don't think his influence is very big. He's being kept on a there's a big stick separate that China is keeping a hold of, keeping Carney and his ilk pretty far removed from any decision-making centers. He has much more influence, and Brookfield has that same period that it was doing the deal in China. It was overseeing the sale of Jared Kushner's office building at 666, Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, that it was selling for like $1.6 billion, and then buying back to get it out of Kushner's hands. So it sold to itself this 666 complex in New York for magnitudes more just for that one apartment than all of the financial transactions that they've ever done with China. So that sort of thing indicates to me that it's been a bit overblown. And I think China knows the dangers represented by British imperial operations utilizing Canada, that they've come to realize are very dangerous and should be kept at bay.
So the next one, this is an intro to the question I'm going to ask. Wolf says the city of London has entered the chat. Andre Maloche, our mutual friend, he says, can we say that the globalists are unable to curb the emergence of multipolarity, often mentioned by Alexander Dugin?
Yeah, you can say that. Multipolarity, I think they've come to accept. They went through a period. They're the preferred pathway to a new world order of a depopulated society under feudalism was celebrated with the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think, as everyone knows, and that was the preferred direct path to the brave new world. Was we're gonna we won. The globalists have won. The world history is ended, says Francis Fukuyama, the neocon transhumanist. The history is over. because history was made by individuals, and individuals were expressing their ideas and aspirations through the nation state, and the nation state and individualism is over. And now we've just got the age of control. So there's no more history. There's no more change. It's pretty much entropy from here on in, a utopian entropy of permanent utopian blah. We just have to maybe bomb a few countries that are still not playing along and fitting into the puzzle perfectly. But, a few bombings of Serbia, a few, overthrows of governments. If
you want to make an omelet, you got to crack some eggs.
Got to crack, yeah. So we'll crack a few more eggs, but otherwise we won the day. Now that's no longer the case, and I think that they've come to realize that they overshot their expectations, and instead there have been some brilliant maneuvers by the part of the intelligentsia that took control of policy in China and Russia, especially China being much more strong than Russia, but both together have created a foundation upon which something has emerged that is multipolar. It's got tons of problems, but it's based upon a rejection of the death cult, and that's important. The rejection of the idea that the new system has to be based upon erasing thousands of years of ancient civilizations and killing off their populations. They don't want that, so that's good. And they do have certain positive principles that are historically grounded, that are very good, that they're acting upon. So, I think with Marco Rubio, of all people, coming out just a couple of months ago, first saying we have to accept that a multipolar order is the way we're gonna expect things to manage from now on, here on out, at least for the next few generations. That's true, but not the word multipolar doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And so that's a big thing too, is that, if you're a Xi Jinping, you're thinking about multipolar from the standpoint of respecting different nodes that should be respected as having their own independence, with an idea that we can find points of common brotherhood, common mutual self-interest in building things for our future, avoiding war, doing things that are ultimately going to harmonize different civilizations by respecting their differences, but by bringing out what's universally human in all of us, that is to have a better life for our grandkids, building things accordingly, and problem solving problems that the universe throws at us to overcome our limits to growth. That's a healthier view of multipolarity than I think the type you have coming out of the neocon groups that use the language, but they don't actually mean it. For them, it means something more like what you had seen from George Orwell, which is that a world should be divided by these multipolar jurisdictions of Oceania and East Asia and Eurasia. That'll be these closed fascist, areas that will have this negotiation to agree to forever war to keep their populations under control of each other's jurisdictions, with the illusion, or at least the suggestion, that there would be a higher managerial elite lording even above this trifecta of fascist sort of jurisdictions. So that's the other view. And I don't know how. I think Dugin has some virtue in how he thinks about it, but I think he's got some blind spots where, because of his view that dichotomizes the East and the West in a very severe way that I don't believe should be dichotomized. Like he believes that the grandeur of the Eastern sort of Christian ethic, of the Orthodox Christian ethic, is based upon a rejection of modernity, a rejection of the principles of the Renaissance, the idea of, every individual made in the living image of the Creator and thus capable of participating in the unfolding of creation, which at the best, I think in the best, animated the biggest growth bursts of progress in Europe and North America. I think he dichotomizes that, and I don't think he should. I think that he sees somehow. I think some of his thinking runs a risk of falling into an alignment of a division of powers along an Orwellian line of control versus the Xi Jinping and I think Putin orientation, which is much more sublime and I believe more natural to the human condition. I don't know if that helps. That's kind of a rambling answer, but that's the only one I got.
How are you doing for time? We got 3 more questions.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, another question from Uncle Ray. I would love Matt to talk about the secret British network called British Security Coordination, ran by Canadian William Stevenson to get the U.S. into World War II using Pearl Harbor. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, Uncle Ray. Yeah. So there were two opposing security paradigms, Britain versus the USA, before World War II, and the problem was put forth by Philip Kerr very well in 1918 when discussing the frustration. And Philip Kerr at the time was otherwise known as Lord Lothian. They like these like Scythian names. It's weird. And he was the head or one of the top leaders of the Round Table movement, along with Lord Alfred Milner, Leo Amory, that was managing Chatham House and its assets in America that were then being prepared that would become the Council on Foreign Relations. And so he was expressing the frustration as they were wiring up the new League of Nations that was supposed to create a one world government under the control of the Bank of England, and that would replace the sovereign nation state system that they were trying to convince everybody had caused World War II, was just the existence of sovereign nation states. Forget about British intelligence, forget about the machinations behind the scenes of coordinated, assassinations of world leaders like Archduke Ferdinand and the creation of secret military mutual defense deals between, the British and the French and the Russians against Germany. Like, forget about all those things. It's just nation states. And if we get rid of nation states and get a League of Nations world government, it'll be great. So he's expressing his frustration that of the patriotic tradition of America, which doesn't understand the importance of the white man's burden. And he's just saying, like, he's angry that the Americans see some nefariousness in Britain's belief that it has to manage the world as the higher Anglo-Saxon Teutonic race over the inferior races. And he says that, we have to get it into the Americans' heads that we both have to partake in the common sharing of the white man's burden for a one world government. It wasn't easy to do that. And so, at the very early stages, American military intelligence still had a lot of patriots who were very aware of the role of Wall Street in funding fascism and funding the military coup, the bankers' coup against Franklin Roosevelt, which fortunately in 1934 was blocked by a whistleblower who went public with this. But he was interfacing with some very, very good people inside of U.S. military intelligence. America even had, up until World War II, a plan to go to war with England. It's called War Plan Red, which was not just about invading Canada, as is often described. It was set up in 1930, but it was understood that Canada was not a real country, and the broader War Plan Red and War Plan Orange were tied to the scenario of a Japanese-British war launched to destroy America, and how America was going to counterattack in opposition to that force. And so globally, they had to take secure controls of British Canada, while at the same time securing other British controls of Japan, or of different British assets that had exerted influence in Latin America. So it was a global thing. It wasn't Canada versus the USA as most Canadians have been traumatized around this scenario to believe. It was much bigger than that. So anyway, with William Stevenson, who was a Canadian Anglophile espionage strategist who was brought into MI6, and he came up with the solution to reform America's military intelligence by merging it with Britain through the intermediary of Canada. And so the idea was Oshawa would be the location that would be selected for a new assassination psychological warfare training camp for the new American intelligence that was going to be installed to take control of U.S. intelligence more generally. They would come to Canada, funded by the Rockefellers. It was William Stevenson's SOE office was in Rockefeller Plaza in New York, and so they established Camp X, and so you had British MI6 operatives and Cambridge operatives coming down and training U.S. troops in the arts of black operations, psychological warfare, other things that then formed the foundation of what became the retooling of the OSS. So how the OSS became contaminated with this once America did enter World War II finally. And because the OSS still had too many patriots that understood too well the role of the City of London and British and American banks in funding fascism, which is what they did. That's why Hitler was successful. They had to be purged, and they were purged through, again, the shutdown under Truman of the OSS in September of 1945, the creation then of the US-UK Signals Agreement in 1946, the same day as Churchill announces the Iron Curtain will now be launched, and the Anglo-American Special Relationship under the Truman Doctrine, which then creates the paradigm around which the CIA is brought online in 1947. And so those are the periods out of which Britain sort of takes control of American military intelligence, and the SOE was the gateway into that. Yeah.
Wow, that's I wish I hadn't heard that depressing story. The slow,
Sorry.
steady decline of the U.S.
And Pearl Harbor. Yeah. So Marty Seif is a friend of mine, and he has given a class on this stuff. And he made the point that Pearl Harbor, though it's often blamed as, like, it's often labeled as sort of the America's first 9/11 inside job to create a bankers war. No, but British intelligence was involved, and I think it was. So Marty Seif had made the point, and he cited a book that I purchased. I haven't read it yet. Going through Australia's encryption intelligence station in Northern Australia that decrypted Japanese communications. Everything was encrypted. So they successfully did it like several days before Pearl Harbor had happened. And they passed it on to Winston Churchill, and Churchill blocked the transmission of that information to Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt had a bunch of Rhodes Scholar and other foreign deep state operatives following Churchill's lead embedded within the U.S. State Department, who were also very, very intent on bailing out Britain because Hitler kind of went off the reservation. At a certain point, he didn't want to be the second in command under the New World Order. He wanted to be the alpha dog, and he wanted Britain to be his junior partner. So when he started going off the rails in that sense, there was a fight in England over whether they would stick to the plan or whether they would abort. The faction that chose to abort was led by Leo Amory and Churchill, and so they aborted the plan to live to fight another day. But the problem was they still had this gigantic, super powerful Hitler machine that they had built up over like 20 years that was like running roughshod, and they couldn't put it down without the U.S. involvement. But the U.S. still wasn't strong enough when Churchill started begging FDR to come in there. The U.S. economy was still suffering from the effects of the Great Depression. It was not strong enough to properly enter the war. So by 41, certain forces inside of America initiated, or they allowed for the attack of Pearl Harbor. But it was the overseer of that was not FDR. I don't think he was kept in the loop. It was Churchill the whole time who was withholding that information. And maybe Japan was guaranteed certain promises that were never followed through on. I'm not too sure how they got Japan to do that at that moment. That was suicidal, but literally suicidal.
Yeah, and I never understood that. I'm like, well, I'm looking at the map. Japan's like this big. Like, why would you attack the country over there?
And they say, oh, it's because America cut off their America sanctioned Japan and made it tougher on them to access U.S. sold energy goods and produce that they were purchasing from the United States, and that's why they attacked America, because there was this like 6-month sanctioning of Japan. But Japan was also carrying out massive war crimes, provably so, on the Chinese population and Manchuria population. Like millions and millions were being massacred on a regular basis. So yeah, I think that sanction was perfectly justified, and that's not a reason why you would then go and pick a fight like they did onto Pearl Harbor, onto the United States. That's not sufficient in my mind to justify that action. So there's got to be more behind the scenes that I'm missing that I don't know if we're ever going to find out.
Well, look into it. Next time you come back, I want you to tell me what your findings are.
Yeah.
I don't really understand this question. You probably do. Mr. Ehret, this is from Wolf, in addition to mundane interests at the global governance level, hybrid entities of men and institutions, there are quieter power groups centered on Saturnian, Cronian, cult control, cybernetics. Best guesstimate, who's the top dog in this present era?
I don't know what Cronian is. I know Saturnian is... Oh, Kronos. Oh, Kronos cult. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Okay, yeah. So yeah, Saturn is otherwise known as the god Kronos, the god of wasting time and cannibalism of your children. That's sort of like one of the interpretations of Saturn and Kronos. And yeah, there's a very evil cult that's very powerful. It's true, that has maintained continuity around the worship of death and the murder of the young. That's sadly true. And they utilize different things mechanistically from time to time to express their will to power and keep the masses of their victims as ignorant as possible to the real power centers. That's also true. Cybernetics is the most modern manifestation of that since World War II. I agree. Who is at the power center? I don't know how useful that is. Like, I mean, I could tell you some things that I hypothesize is true. And I found usefulness in, like, there's this dude people might have heard of named Fritz Springmeier. And he wrote a book in the 90s called Bloodlines of the Illuminati. And it's a useful book. I got to say, I think it does map out some of the leading families who have maintained continuity and still exert a disproportionate amount of influence today, but who can trace their lineage back to, some of the Roman Caesars, the patrician class, but even in some cases, some of the Persian and Egyptian high families. We're talking the high families here, right? The ones that maintain existence beyond the overthrow of dynastic systems. There's certain continuities. Some go. I don't think it's not a fully guaranteed thing that just because you're one of these high families, one of the inner elites, it doesn't mean that you've got total security. And I think that there's evidence that some have been flushed and replaced over the eons. But there is a thing, and they do maintain continuity of ideology through a system of cultish Gnostic beliefs about the nature of the universe that have certain mystery cults that groom each subsequent generation through a process of very scientific abuse and self-brainwashing and myth narrative creation for themselves, as well as for the lower tiers of various myths for the managerial elite below them, for the masses below that. So it's a nested system of controls, kind of like what cybernetics is, as far as a nested system of centralized management under a highly bureaucratized shell game. It makes it intelligible for those in the executive sort of nerve center to see the whole in a simple way with certain formulas to manage the talking cows. And it seems to me that that what's more useful than the particular names, I could throw out the Orsini family is disproportionately influential. I could say that. But what is that? How useful is that? I could throw out the Zorzi family. I could just say it. Okay, what do we do with that information, right? But I think, again, what's more useful is the technique of sophistry that they utilize through both mystery cults, initiatory processes that have certain intelligible methods to their modus of operations. Edgar Allan Poe actually gets at the soul of this thing, the ugly, dark soul of what this is, pretty well. In several of his short stories that I think are highly useful to study, not just to read for entertainment, but to study the Imp of the Perverse, or the Mask of the Red Death, or even the Telltale Heart. Frankly, kind of gets you into that pathetic mindset of an oligarch. William Wilson, of the character of William Wilson, who has a sort of shadow self, a mirror self, that is his enemy, but also his better side that he has to kill. I think these are all different aspects of the fragmented psychological profile of the controlled schizophrenia that the oligarchy puts themselves into, that they can sort of do things that involve awakening and integrating with the shadow inside, the darkness and the vice inside, through different ritual forms of self-abuse and the abuse of the other. The fusion of opposites, moral opposites, by things like murder and sex that have to be fused together. The fusion of the profane and the sacred also helps to both defy natural law, defy conscience, defy reason, and then break free to self-actualize in some integration of your evil self into, a self-deified apotheosis of the self, of the idea that now we are God. That's the big reveal that they always want to kind of get to, is that now they've self-actualized and they are God. There is no God but them and their ego. that then becomes sort of the foundation around which they can then abuse others with no grating away at their conscience. And Poe demonstrates that that's impossible, that they're self-deluding. And so they will, like in the Imp of the Perverse story, self-annihilate, or in the Telltale Heart, that you can't escape. Even in your darkest dreams, when you go to sleep, your conscience will still grate at you and hurt you, because you're hurting yourself. It's your conscience is your friend, and they treat it like it's their enemy to be destroyed. So that's like the ultimate sort of fallacy, I think, of the point of Luciferian defiance that the oligarchy is committed to holding on to. They've got no will or power to let go of that infantile ego that's become their sort of religion. But it manifests in really disgusting ways from the standpoint of real power. And I think we're just at the beginning, like the early phases of the human experience in the universe. And unfortunately, we still have some growing pains before we overcome and break free of this infantile ego that's been holding us down in forever wars and ignorance, which is the oligarchy. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
I guess the final questions from Mr. Milosh is basically, what do we do about this? How do we deal with these oligarchs?
Well, I mean, I've been sort of alluding to it indirectly, but look at what the oligarchs are afraid of and do more of that. And look at nations right now who have at least tapped into that insight and are acting accordingly to adopt modes of action and strategy that are premised around the best of what the USA used to be. And Andre knows my thoughts on the specifics of how that's being manifested right now by the leadership currently within China, within the better part of Russia, within the better part of Iran, and other associated nations that are doing their best to drain their swamp and introduce a better set of policy actions for their people, their cultures, their civilization, their moral fiber. And they're trying to create as many spaces for their confused Western counterparts to get our heads out of our asses and cooperate with them on those bases, which so far has not happened. And I hope it can happen before the red button's pressed. So that's how I'm thinking about it.
All right. Well, Matt, if you could tell the audience, where do they follow you, and where can they watch your great movies?
Ooh, yeah. Well, they can go to right there on the screen under my name is matthewehret.substack.com. That's one of the easiest ways to follow my work. And there's mostly free stuff, but for people who want to do the paid upgrade, you get little benefits, like you can watch the full documentary. That's for paid subscribers for the first few weeks. Also regular invitations to the meetings that I host on a weekly basis. That's all there too for paid subscribers. And then otherwise, CanadianPatriot.org. All of my books are pretty easy to find on that website, as well as my wife's books that we publish together. And a few other Canadian Patriot books are available for people who love history. And RisingTideFoundation.net is my last sort of platform that I manage as more of an educational outlet with my wife. And that's RisingTideFoundation.net. Well,
Matt, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on. I know it's a Saturday; it was short notice, but you were a wealth of information. So it was both me and the audience, and appreciate you coming on.
Cool, man. No, it was a pleasure. This is a great way to spend my Saturday, and thank you, audience.
All right, take care. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.